Europe, something is quietly changing. Fewer children are being born. At the same time, migration into the continent continues to rise. And together, these forces may reshape the future of an entire civilization. Before we begin, subscribe to The Last Narrative for more deep, thought-provoking documents.
You know, this isn't the kind of crisis that explodes onto your screen. There are no sudden market crashes, no armies on the march to announce its arrival. No, this is something much quieter. A slow, creeping change that's been unfolding for decades. It's happening not in the grand halls of power, but in the most private, intimate spaces of life, in our homes and in our families. It's the story of classrooms with more empty desks, of quiet villages where the laughter of children is a fading memory. It's a future being written with fewer people than the past. This is Europe's silent decline. A shift so gradual, so pervasive, that an entire continent can be transformed without anyone being able to point to the exact moment it all changed.
At the very heart of this transformation is a single number, 1.5. That's it, 1.5. It's the average number of children born to a woman across most of Europe today. And it might just look like another cold statistic, right? Something you'd find buried in a government report. But it is the very engine of this silent change. It represents a promise of continuity that's going unfulfilled. It's the simple math that tells us the next generation will be smaller than the last. It's a future being defined not by what's being added, but by what's quietly being taken away. A society that isn't growing or even just holding its own, but one that is slowly and very surely shrinking.
Think about it for a second. For any society to just stay the same size from one generation to the next, it needs to hit what the experts call the replacement rate. That magic number is about 2.1 children per woman. Simple, right? 2 kids to replace 2 parents, and that little extra, the 0.1, that's to account for those who won't have children, or for tragedies like infant mortality. It is the absolute bare minimum for a population to sustain itself. And for the better part of half a century now, almost all of Europe has been living below that critical line. This isn't some new trend, it's a long, deep demographic winter, and there are no real signs of a spring. The strange thing is, this story of decline actually began with a boom. In the years after the Second World War, there was this incredible sense of optimism. Europe was literally rising from the rubble. And with that new prosperity came big families. But that confidence, it didn't last. The massive social changes of the late 60s and 70s, a new focus on individualism, and shifting economic realities, it all started to change the family equation. And by the 1980s, a new pattern had locked in across the entire continent. Birth rates dropped below that crucial replacement level, and they just stayed there. Then came the pressures of our modern world. Globalization, the soaring costs of living, the need for 2 incomes just to get by. All it did was push the numbers down even further. People started careers first and families later, if they started them at all. And today? Well, today, many European nations are at the lowest points in their recorded history, stuck on a path that is now, for the next few generations at least, almost impossible to change. And this has 2 massive consequences that unfold at the same time. See, this isn't just a story about fewer babies being born. It's about the entire structure of society fundamentally changing. Because while we have fewer young people, modern medicine means we're all living longer than ever before. So that classic population pyramid you learned about in school, it's flipping upside down. It's becoming top-heavy. The continent as a whole is growing old. And a society with more grandparents than grandchildren is a society that thinks differently. It votes differently. It even dreams differently. It can become a society that spends more time looking back at its past than building for its future, more focused on protecting what it has than risking it all for what could be next. This demographic reality, it's not some abstract problem for our grandkids to worry about. The consequences are hitting us right now, today. You can see it in government budgets, you can hear it in corporate boardrooms, and you can feel it in the everyday lives of millions of people. Europe is now facing the inheritance of its own choices. After decades of this silent decline, the bill is finally coming due. And this brings us to the core economic problem, the entire social contract of the 20th century. The generous pensions, the free healthcare, the social safety nets that made Europe the envy of the world. All of it was built on one simple, unspoken assumption, that there would always be more young workers than old retirees.
It was basically a pyramid scheme that worked because the continent was always growing. Each new generation was bigger than the last, and their contributions would easily pay for their parents' retirement. But what happens when that's no longer true? What happens when the pyramid starts to invert? Who is left to pay for the promises of the past in a future with fewer people?
The numbers here tell a really stark story. Back in the 1970s, for every one person retired, you had about 4 people working and paying into the system. The math was easy. It worked perfectly. Fast forward to today, and that ratio has already dropped to less than 3 workers for every 1 retiree. And the projections for the next few decades? They're terrifying. Within our lifetimes, we could see fewer than 2 workers for every pensioner. The pressure this puts on pension funds and healthcare systems is just immense. This isn't a political opinion, by the way. It's just math. It's a reality you can't spin or wish away.
The whole model was designed for growth. It relied on it. A growing economy and a growing population fed each other, funding this incredible system of social care from the cradle to the grave. But now, that model is smashing up against the hard physics of a shrinking population. A smaller and smaller workforce is being asked to carry a bigger and bigger burden. The grand promise of the 20th century is having a head-on collision with the reality of the 21st.
And the economic ripple effects, they spread out and touch absolutely everything. Businesses are already facing chronic worker shortages, and not just for PhDs and engineers. We're talking about truck drivers, construction workers, farmers, people that care for the elderly. Fewer young people means fewer new households being formed, which means less demand for everything. Houses, cars, furniture. It's a massive drag on economic growth. And of course, as the population gets older, healthcare costs just explode. Governments get stuck in what they call the pension trap, where all their options are politically poisonous. Do you raise taxes on the young, cut benefits for the old, or tell everyone they have to work until they're 70? And maybe the most dangerous part, an aging society can become a less dynamic one. It can become afraid of taking risks, afraid of the kind of innovation that actually drives prosperity in the long run.
But just as Europe's internal engine is slowing down, a completely different and incredibly powerful force is reshaping the continent from the outside. A world on the move. Millions of people, driven by a powerful cocktail of hope and desperation, are making their way to Europe's borders. This is the second great demographic story of our time, a powerful and often chaotic countercurrent to the continent's quiet internal decline. So you have to ask yourself, right? Why are millions of people trying so desperately to get into a continent that, by its own numbers, seems to be fading? It's a simple question, but the answer is anything but. The truth is, despite all its problems, Europe still acts as this powerful beacon of hope and stability for much of the world. It represents not just a place on a map, but an idea. The possibility of a life that is safer, freer, and more prosperous than anything you could have back home. It's not just one thing that pulls people in, it's a whole collection of factors. It's the simple chance to get a job that pays a real wage. It's the appeal of a stable society, one that's governed by laws, not by corruption or violence. It's the promise of basic human rights, of being able to speak your mind, to get an education for your kids, and to have a safety net if things go wrong. And then there's just simple geography. Europe happens to be right next door to regions torn apart by conflict, by political chaos, by economic collapse, and now by the growing impacts of climate change. You put all that together, prosperity, stability, and proximity, and you get a magnet, an almost irresistible force, pulling people north. And we have these neat legal boxes we try to put people in. Asylum seeker, economic migrant. But the reality on the ground, it's almost always way messier than that. Of course, some people are asylum seekers in the purest sense. They're fleeing a documented war, and their right to protection is written in international law. And others are economic migrants, simply trying to escape crushing poverty to build a better life. But in the real world, these lines blur. A farmer whose land turns to dust because of climate change. Is he fleeing an environmental catastrophe or an economic one? A family escaping a failed state. Are they fleeing violence or a total lack of opportunity? The clean definitions we write in our laws often struggle to contain the messy, desperate reality of the human condition. In the journey itself, it is a story of incredible human drama, and often of unimaginable suffering. For so many, The path to Europe means crossing deserts, facing down smugglers and traffickers, and navigating dangerous hostile borders. And for those who come by sea, the Mediterranean has become two things at once: a gateway to a new life and a vast unmarked graveyard. Thousands die every single year trying to make that crossing. And the fact that so many are still willing to risk everything, it just tells you how powerful the forces pushing them from their homes are, and how powerful the dream pulling them towards Europe remains.
And so this is where we arrive, at the very heart of the entire story. The point where these two immense opposing forces finally meet. The slow, quiet internal force of aging and decline colliding with the fast, loud external force of global migration. This collision, this is what will define Europe in the 21st century. It's an intersection of need and hope, of opportunity and fear. It is the intersection of decline and of arrival.
You know, if you were just looking at this on a spreadsheet, the whole thing would seem almost perfect, seductively simple. On one side of the ledger, you have a continent with a void, a desperate need for workers, for young people, for new taxpayers to fund its promises and fill its emptying towns. And on the other side, you have a world with immense demographic pressure, vast populations of young, ambitious people in Africa and Asia who are desperate for the very safety and opportunity that Europe has. On paper, one problem looks like the perfect solution to the other, but a society is not a spreadsheet, and the reality is far, far more complicated. And that brings us to the one question that is now dominating and dividing Europe. From the parliaments in Brussels to the kitchen tables in Sicily. Is this historic movement of people a lifeline? A necessary shot of adrenaline to save an aging continent from economic decline? Or is it a fundamental societal challenge? Something that risks overwhelming social services, straining public trust, and changing the very cultural identity of Europe forever? And the truth is, the answer you get depends entirely on who you ask.
So let's look at the first argument, the one you hear from economists and business leaders. For them, migration isn't really a choice, it's an absolute economic necessity. They'll point out that migrants often do the essential jobs that native-born Europeans just don't want to do anymore, working in the fields, on construction sites, caring for the elderly. As young workers, they also contribute far more in taxes over their lives than they take out in benefits, which helps prop up those very pension systems we were talking about. And they can bring new energy, new ideas, and an entrepreneurial spirit that can jolt a stagnant economy back to life. From this point of view, migration is the demographic patch Europe desperately needs to just stay in the game.
But there is another side to this story, a perspective focused less on the economic charts and more on the social fabric. People who hold this view worry about the strain on public services. When you have a large number of people arrive in a short period of time, it puts immense pressure on local schools, on housing, on the healthcare system. They point to the real friction that can arise when different cultures with very different social and religious values have to learn to live side by side. Then you have the legitimate security concerns, how to manage illegal immigration and properly vet everyone who arrives. And underneath it all is this deeper, almost existential anxiety, a fear of losing a distinct national identity, a sense of shared culture that was built over hundreds, even thousands of years. So what happens when a society can't agree on something this fundamental? Well, the debate stops being a debate. It becomes a deep and often bitter political fracture that runs right through the heart of Europe. This issue, demographics and migration, has become the single biggest fault line in modern politics. It's fueling the rise of populist movements. It's shattering old political alliances. And it's creating massive divisions, not just within countries, but between them. And it has created a political fight where the two sides are basically speaking different languages. They operate from completely different sets of fears and priorities. One side will talk constantly about humanitarian duty and international law, while the other will focus on national sovereignty and border control. But the hard truth is that compassion by itself isn't a sustainable policy, and security by itself isn't a humane one. And so far, finding that workable balance, that middle ground that a majority of people can actually support, has proven to be completely elusive. At its core, you're really looking at a clash between two fundamentally different worldviews about what Europe even is. On one hand, you have the humanitarian or cosmopolitan view. This sees Europe as part of a deeply interconnected world with a moral duty to help those in need.
It believes that openness and diversity are sources of strength. On the other hand, you have the sovereignist view. This view prioritizes the nation-state above all else. It argues that a government's first and only job is to protect its own borders, its own citizens, and its own unique culture. Right now, these two visions for Europe's future are in a direct and often vicious conflict.
And you see this clash play out in every single policy question. Take border control. Should the focus be on building higher fences or on creating safe, legal ways for people to come? What about asylum claims? Should they be processed in camps outside of Europe, or does everyone have a right to apply once they arrive? How much access should newcomers have to welfare benefits? How long and how difficult should the path to becoming a citizen be? This total political paralysis, this failure of the mainstream to find any workable consensus, has poured gasoline on the fire of populists and nationalist parties all across the continent.
So let's just step back from the shouting and the day-to-day politics for a moment. Because these two colossal forces, this internal decline and this external pressure, they are posing the most profound questions about Europe's long-term destiny. The continent is standing at a massive crossroads, and the path it takes from here, whether by choice or by the sheer force of events, will decide what European civilization looks like for centuries to come. The future is unwritten, and the stakes could not possibly be higher.
So the first big question is, can you fix the internal problem? Can you actually reverse the demographic decline? Well, governments have certainly tried. They've thrown all sorts of things at the problem. Cash payments for having babies, heavily subsidized daycare, generous parental leave. And look, these policies can sometimes help a little bit, on the margins. They might nudge the birth rate up from, say, 1.3 to 1.5. But nowhere in the developed world has any policy ever succeeded in pushing fertility all the way back up to that magic replacement level of 2.1. The bigger forces at play, the high cost of living, the changing ideas about career and family, they just seem to be too powerful. The ship, for the most part, has sailed.
And if you accept that the demographic decline is basically baked in, and if you accept that migration is going to continue in some form, well, then the next question becomes unavoidable. A transformation of European identity is no longer a possibility. It becomes an inevitability. The Europe of the year 2075 or 2100 will be profoundly, irreversibly more diverse, more multi-ethnic, more multi-religious than the Europe of the 20th century. So the real question isn't if this change will happen, but how it will be managed. Will it lead to a new, dynamic, hybrid identity? Or will it lead to a future of fragmentation, of resentment, of a society broken up into competing tribes? And this brings us to the biggest question of all, the one that sits underneath everything else. The modern nation-state, with its fixed borders and this idea of one people, one culture, one language, it's actually a pretty recent invention in the grand scheme of things. Is that political structure, which was designed for a totally different world, really equipped to handle the realities of the 21st century? In a world where money, information, and now people are flowing across borders more easily than ever before, the very idea of the nation-state is being tested in ways it has never been before. So in the end, it really feels like it boils down to two possible paths. Will the future be one of a slow, difficult, but ultimately manageable evolution, a gradual transformation into a new kind of Europe? Or will the tensions just become too great to bear? Will the friction between decline and arrival, between these two warring visions of Europe's future, lead not to a slow evolution, but to a sudden, violent breaking point? Civilizations rarely collapse in a single moment. They evolve slowly, often without realizing it. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Last Narrative.